Good morning and welcome to worship. As we gather to worship this morning, we realize that we meet under truly unusual circumstances. I can remember a passage of scripture that I read out of the New Testament. The Apostle Paul is writing to all the Christians at Rome. And there he addresses two people in particular. And he says, "And greetings to Priscilla and Aquila and the church in their house." Well, this morning I welcome you to the church in our house. And I look forward to one day before long that we can go back to the church. I truly miss the singing of the hymns and the fellowship that we have one for another. I've always appreciated the church organ. And there's just something about the music of the church that makes my worship complete. But today we meet under different circumstances. And so I say again, I welcome you to the church in our house. Experience teaches us that regardless where we meet, God in spirit is always with us. Different times in the Bible, the people tried to rob people of the presence of God and the fellowship of Christianity. They took the Apostle Paul and threw him into a dungeon. But it was discovered that deepest in all the dungeons that could be, Paul always had fellowship with the living God, the Spirit of God. They took the beloved disciple John and placed him on the Isle of Patmos, thinking that they would separate him from his people. But they failed to realize that they could not separate John from the Spirit of the living God. And there on the Isle of Patmos, John wrote his book of Revelation. So I say to you today, we are so grateful that we can meet, not in person, but in the Spirit, and that God is always with us. As we gather this morning, I would like to remind you that we're not able to understand and to hear about all the people and all the things that are happening into your life. But we do have the church website. And there on the website, if you'll tune in, you can get some of the news that might be breaking. And especially there, we have a list of all the people who have called in and requested prayer. So I remind you to look on our website, and that way we can somewhat keep up with one another. I wondered this morning what topic I would choose to try and share with you. I thought about all the bad things that are happening in the world, and all the people who have lost loved ones, all the sickness that is all about us. And I thought to myself, we've had enough bad news. And I wondered what it would be that I might just share with you that might be lighthearted and good news to hear. There's an old song that goes, "After I leave for worlds unknown, over the great divide." And it goes on to pose a question. The question is, what shall I leave behind? And the chorus goes, leave behind, leave behind. What shall I leave behind? After I've passed to worlds unknown, what shall I leave behind? It seems that the mindset of most people today is that we leave it all behind. How many times have I had folks come to me and say, well, you can't take it with you? Let me share with you a story. Some time back, I was asked to take part in a funeral of a friend. It had been some years since I had met this friend or seen this friend. But I received a phone call and they gave me directions to a private cemetery down at Lexington, Georgia. It was his request that he be buried in this family cemetery located in a farm near the little city of Lexington. They gave me directions on how to come. And I thought to myself, well, it might be hard to find this place. And so I decided that what I would do, I would leave a good deal early. And so I left home about 2 hours, really early. And believe it or not, I followed directions and went straight to the place. And I realized that I was there almost 2 hours too early. I walked around in the cemetery for a moment. The sun was shining. It was a warm day. And I sat down and leaned up against this huge marble tomb. And before long, I was fast asleep. I slept for a little while, and when I woke up, I looked across from where I was seated, and directly in front of me was another large tombstone. And on that tombstone, I could see some words inscribed. Time had somewhat erased part. But finally, I was able to make out the words that were written there. And those words went like this. What I made, I spent. What I spent, I lost. But what I gave, I have. That last statement caught my attention. He said, what I gave, I have. And I kind of settled back and I thought to myself, well, doggers, you can take it with you anyway, can't you? Maybe this is what Jesus had in mind when he spoke these words. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon this earth, where the wrath and the rust does corrupt. But lay up treasures in heaven. What did he mean, lay up treasures in heaven? What is it that we can take from this life into life eternal? So I picked up my pen and I started to jot down some words. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, every word that is fitly spoken, we carry on to be with us in heaven. The psalmist wrote, words fitly spoken are like apples of gold and pitchers of silver. I can remember when I was a boy, around our house, a lot of things we didn't have. At Christmas time, my parents always made it a very special point that we had much candy and an awful lot of fruit. I can remember going by dining room table. And on that table, my mother would place a big gold pitcher. And in that pitcher, she placed all those beautiful golden apples. And in later years, I thought, this was a picture of what the psalmist was trying to say. He said, words fitly spoken are like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. You see, all those words, they are carried on to heaven. Jesus said to his followers, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel, giving guidance to the people. I can think about all the times in my life when other people tried to guide me. I can think about all the words of encouragement that were spoken on my behalf. I was appointed to 6 little churches in Union County some years back. This was to begin my ministry. I was the most ill-equipped preacher that ever went out on a circuit. I was also enrolled at Young Harris College. And as time went on, I felt that I was not doing a good job as a preacher. And I was having difficulty also in the college. It'd been so many years since I'd been to school. And so one day I lay out on the campus underneath a dogwood tree, and I made up my mind that it was time for me to go home. Well, that afternoon I decided that I would go down and speak to a fellow minister, the Reverend Ryan C. Wright, who was pastor of the First Church there in Blairsville, Georgia. I met Ryan in his office and I told him how I felt. I said, Ryan, I just can't preach. I don't know what I'm doing. I think God has made a mistake. And I think it's time for me to go home. After listening, Ryan finally said to me, he said, well, Marshall, you might not be able to preach like Billy Graham. But you see, God doesn't need another Billy Graham. He already has one. But there are things that you can do. And I'm sure that there are people that you can reach that not even the great Billy Graham might be able to preach. I believe God has a place for you. And I think what you ought to do is just get up and go home and put your hand in God's hand and just be the best preacher that you can be. I thank God for those words. Words that are like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. Not only the words fitly spoken, but also all the good deeds done in the body. Those are things that are recorded up in heaven, laying up treasures in heaven. Well, I want to share with you a thought. When I think about all the deeds that we do, all the good things that we do in the name of God, all those things are recorded in heaven. The Bible tells us that up in heaven there is the Lamb's book of life, and all the deeds done in the body are recorded in that book. So what can we send, or what can we carry with us up to heaven? What treasures that we might lay up in store? All the good deeds done in the body. And then I thought about all the gifts that are made in the name of God. Some years back, we had in our church a little old lady that had virtually nothing as far as the world was concerned. But every single week, she always made a contribution to God. She had been sick for some time, and I went by to see her. And she said, I need to catch up on my church dues. And I smiled at her. But she gave me a little envelope. And inside she had placed her gifts week after week. All the gifts freely given. Let me make one other statement. When I think about all the treasures that are laid up for us in heaven, I also think about all the intentions that we have deeply desired. And you might say, well, what do you mean all the intentions that you have desired? The Bible teaches us that we're held accountable for all the thoughts of our minds. All the thoughts of evil, we are held accountable. Then I think likewise is it true, all the good thoughts that have been ours are also laid up as treasures. There's a story from the Old Testament. There was a man whom we all know very well, the great shepherd king David. David all his life desired that he might build a house for God. He wanted to build a temple. But David had to face giants in his life and in the life of the people. He had to run a nation that was somewhat wayward. And in all his struggles, he never found time to do that thing that he always wanted to do, and that is build a house for God. And now he is old, and he's facing his end. And it is recorded in the scriptures where God came to David and he said, David, all your life you have desired that you might build for me a house. Well, I say unto you, because thou desired in your heart to build me a house, just count it as done. You know, when I think about all the good intentions in our lives. Oh, I've worked so hard, and I've seen other people so hard who had a desire that they might do something good in the name of God. But all their efforts and all my efforts seem to fail. But just to know that God judges the intent of our heart. He said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So all those good intentions that have been ours are treasures that are now laid up in heaven. Oh, I say to you, friends, just think we can take it with us. All the words fitly spoken, all the gifts freely given, all the good deeds done in the name of God, and yes, even all the intent of our heart are laid up for us as treasures in heaven. May God bless you, and may God keep you, is our prayer. Amen and amen.